Eastern Europe and Baltic countries. Eastern Europe countries consist of Belarus, Bulgaria, and the Czech Republic, Hungary, Moldova, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Ukraine, and western part of the Russian Federation. The spoken language of these countries are English, French, German, Greek, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Nordic language, and East European language. Baltic countries are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania share common features and similar history. These three countries at the EU border with Russia regained their independence from the Soviet Union in the early 90s before joining the EU in 2004 and more recently the Euro area. General information. Central and Eastern Europe is a term encompassing the countries in the Baltics, Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe, and mostly in the Balkans. Usually means former communist states from the Eastern Bloc and Warsaw Pact in Europe. Scholarly literature often uses the abbreviations CEE or CEEC.
After decades of Soviet rule, the Baltic countries regained their independence in the 1990s. How are the countries leaving behind the remnants of Russian rule and facing up to a resurgent Russia? The Baltic countries have had a troubled history. Through most of the past 2 centuries, they have been dominated by Russia in one form or another. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia had a brief stint at independence in the 1920s and 30s, following the collapse of the Russian Empire into a civil war. But the countries were then invaded by the Soviet Union in the 1940s in the turmoil of World War II. While the likes of Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, and Romania were part of the Warsaw Pact and remained at least nominally independent, the 3 Baltic countries were annexed and became Soviet republics within the broader Soviet Union. The Russian-centered Soviet Union implemented a policy of Russification, particularly under Stalin, which saw many ethnic Russians move to the countries. While the ethnic mix of Estonia and Latvia looked like this in 1945, when they gained their independence in the 1990s following the collapse of the Soviet Union, they look like this. Not knowing what to do with the significant Russian minorities, they only gave citizenship to those families who had lived there before the 1940 occupation. In Estonia and Latvia, those that came after needed to be naturalized, which required people to speak Estonian or Latvian on a day-to-day level, effectively locking the Russian descendants out of the political arena. The Russians living there and their descendants didn't get citizenship. Instead, they got residency status, which created second-class citizens. While they enjoyed the same social rights, they couldn't vote in elections. These measures were later relaxed, and the proportion of stateless people fell from 32% in 1992 to 6.4% in 2014 in Estonia, and 28% in 1993 to 10.4% in 2020 in Latvia, though this was in part due to immigration back to Russia. The 3 countries were also the least obedient Soviet republics, seeing partisan activity well into the 1950s, which cemented anti-Soviet sentiment. Following Gorbachev's policy of glasnost, or openness in the 1990s, which saw a revival of nationalism among the different ethnic groups which composed the communist country, the Soviet Union broke up. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were the first countries to secede and regain their independence in the 1990s. The anti-Soviet sentiment quickly propelled them towards the European Union and NATO, which they joined in 2004, operating one of the quickest turnabouts of any communist country. But the legacy of the Soviet Union means that they share many infrastructure links with Russia, particularly in transportation, natural gas, and electricity. It left them with large Russian minorities and vulnerable to the geopolitical pressures from the Kremlin. Yet the countries are making significant investments to remove Russian influence through further integration of their economies with the rest of the European Union. The electricity grid in the Baltics is linked to that of Russia and Belarus and controlled from Moscow, but is set to be synchronized with the rest of Europe in 2026. A 2020 power outage in Riga, the Latvian capital, where Russian officials sat on their hands, reminded officials of the necessity in achieving energetic independence from Russia. Similarly, the countries are inaugurating a series of infrastructure projects aimed at anchoring them further to the west, A series of transmission lines have been laid between Finland and Estonia, Latvia and Sweden, and Poland and Lithuania, reducing their dependence on Russia. Going a step further than decoupling, the Estonian president has stated that the country would no longer buy electricity from Russia. Lithuania has recently adopted a similar strategy in order to boycott electricity produced by the Russian-designed Ostrovets nuclear power plant in Belarus, less than 40 kilometers from its capital. In terms of rail infrastructure, the Baltic countries are constructing the €5 billion Rail Baltica project with support from the European Union, which is set to be completed in 2026. It aims to create an economic corridor from Warsaw to Helsinki, connecting the Baltic countries together and increasing economic growth. This project also involved a switch to Western standards, using wider European train tracks as opposed to the Russian ones. Lithuania is also constructing a massive natural gas terminal in Klaipėda, which is set to double its capacity to import natural gas and supply its neighbors and reduce its dependence on Russian natural gas. It has also built an additional pipeline between itself and Poland as to be able to export natural gas, again, with significant EU funding. Finland and Estonia worked on a similar project called the Baltic Connector Pipeline, connecting Finland to the rest of Europe and undermining Gazprom's dominance in the region, the Russian state-owned gas company. While Russia remains the largest trading partner of the countries, the imports are mostly in the petrochemical domain and will fall as the new terminals increase their capacity. These moves signal a continued decoupling between the infrastructure and consequently the economies of the Baltics from Russia, something that the countries are actively pursuing, with support from the European Union. On top of the economic split between the two parties, the Baltic countries, particularly Estonia and Latvia, which have significant Russian minorities, are trying to rid themselves of Russian influence campaigns. The countries regularly discover and arrest Russian spies, and have had early warning systems to detect pro-Russian sentiment, sometimes going too far and arresting people playing paintball out of fear that they were Russian agitators. The fear of Russia and its disruptive nature has translated into the banning of Russian state TV, which has portrayed Latvia as a failed state, though it is a move that Reporters Without Borders declared as an abuse of European sanction regimes. Russian state media promotes a narrative of a fascist, Russophobe West and European Union, something that the Russian media had previously done in Ukraine in the lead-up to the invasion of the Crimea. Lithuania has since followed on the move, and Estonia had been reportedly considering it. The weaponization of the Russian language there has also led to its progressive removal from schools in Latvia. While education in the Soviet Union was given bilingually, it was progressively phased out in the 2000s, and a recent 2018 law aimed to strip it from use even further. This ban of Russian state media, which has been accompanied by a crackdown on the use of Russian language in the schools, is a move that Russian associations have decried as a marginalization, which threatens to undermine the equality of the labor market and their rights as citizens and residents of the country. While the countries escaped Soviet rule and are making efforts to remove Russian influence, their relationship with Russia has grown rocky since they joined NATO, something that the Kremlin had previously described as a red line. The Baltics formed a neutral buffer with the West, which was removed in the wake of NATO's eastern expansion. Aggressive Russian foreign policy can be understood as an attempt to protect itself from what it sees as Western encroachment in its former sphere of influence. The 2008 Russian invasion of Georgia over Russian citizens in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and the 2014 invasion of Crimea, and the following proxy war in the Ukraine ever since, has served as a warning to the Baltic countries. Since 2014, the countries have significantly increased their military budgets and are some of the only NATO countries to fulfill the 2% mandatory military expenditure requirement. They are also strong supporters of a deepening of the NATO partnership, calling for more troops in Eastern Europe. In 2016, NATO created the Enhanced Forward Presence, a series of battalions in the countries and eastern Poland to react in case of an invasion by Russia. Though they number at only 2,000 men and serve more as a symbol of NATO unity than defending the countries from Russian aggression, the 3 NATO battalions situated in the Baltic countries were careful not to include US troops, out of fear of agitating Russia. While it has no presence there, the United States regularly circulates troops in their area for training exercises from its battalion in Poland and its bases in Germany. Despite the NATO presence there, it remains a mere token army. In the event of a war, Russia could just cut off the Baltic countries from the rest of Europe by closing the Suwałki Gap, the 104-kilometer border between Poland and Lithuania. The flat terrain enclosed between Kaliningrad and Russia's Belarusian ally could be steamrolled by the Russian army before any force could react. Regular military exercises in Kaliningrad, the Russian exclave in the region, and naval exercises in the Baltic Sea, simulating the invasion of the island of Gotland, remind of the vulnerability of the region. The numbers fielded by Russia in the Baltics dwarf those of NATO, and the military threats towards the Baltic countries are real. In the event of a conflict, there is little the West or NATO could do to stop Russia. While the countries are threatened militarily, they are seeking regional cooperation at different levels as counterbalance to Russian presence in the region. The largest of such partnerships is the Three Seas Initiative, a Polish and Romania-led cooperation of 12 EU countries to focus on the region's strategic needs through enhanced cooperation and funding. The initiative serves mainly as a platform for dialogue with the United States to talk about energy and military security, in an attempt to keep the US engaged in a region that has traditionally been Russia's backyard, though it is increasingly looking like a tool to counter China. The lack of involvement from the European Union in the early phases of the project will likely be a roadblock to its success, though it highlights the regional interest in further collaboration and beyond the European Union. The Baltic countries have been dominated by Russia in the past centuries. Since their independence, they have pursued alignment with the West, which has taken place at an accelerated pace since the Russian invasion of the Crimea. The use of Russian minorities in former Soviet republics to sow dissent has led to a clampdown on the use of Russian in schools and in universities, and a ban of Russian state media, as the small countries battle for their cultural identities, though at a cost of the Russian minorities living there. Investments in rail, natural gas, and electricity infrastructure seek to reduce dependence on Russia by pursuing further economic integration with the European Union, and seeking further regional partnerships and closer collaboration with the United States. The Baltics are divorcing Russia, its culture, and its economy.
General information. The Baltic regained independence in the 1990s. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were invaded by the Soviet Union in the 1940s, and there was the turmoil in World War II. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, and Romania were part of the Warsaw Pact and remained at least nominally independent. The three Baltic countries were annexed and became Soviet republics within the border Soviet Union. The Russia-centered Soviet Union implemented a policy of Russification, particularly under Stalin, which saw many ethnic Russians moved to the countries.
Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia for the first time. The anti-Soviet proposal for the European Union, which they joined in equity, of which one of the Western Baltic countries. The legacy of the Soviet Union is that transportation, natural gas, and electricity. It definitely aggression to geopolitical freedom. Okay, foreign policy of the post-Soviet Baltic. Before membership in the European Union, the Baltic Republic decided to break off dialogue with Russia. Latvia was the first to do this in the fall of 1991, depriving almost all Russian-speaking residents of their citizenship rights. Estonia did the same. Lithuania. The convenient geographical location and their commitment to Western democratic processes made it possible to cooperate with Russia and the European Union. Moreover, many hoped that the Baltics would become a bridge to the West.